Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with on the Brandy Show. Today, we have a treat as we talk with syndicated radio show host Michael Patrick Shiels. Michael started his career in radio as a producer for Detroit radio icons Dick Purtan and J.P. McCarthy. His journey to his current post as the host of the syndicated Michigan's Big Show with Michael Patrick Shiels gave him a ringside seat to observe and participate in the golden era of radio in Detroit. Besides his incredible experiences during those years, he has become an author, a friend to presidents, a travel writer, a cigar aficionado, and he also ran with the Bulls in Pamplona. He has a fascinating story and a wonderful memory to discuss his amazing trip in a business we both love, in a community that has had its share of amazing media talent. Enjoy my conversation with Michael Patrick Shiels. You know, you're the busiest guy in broadcasting, I think, Michael. You're traveling, you're doing a morning drive show. Do you ever have time to sit and take a breath?
No, I'm afraid I'd run out of time in life. There's so much to do and so much to see, and I'm excited by all of it. And I love running into friends more than anything. And what a cool thing it is to talk to you.
Oh, it's a great thing to talk to you. And people who don't know your history, and that's where I want to go, is you actually started in the business as a producer for one of the iconic radio voices and personalities in Southeast Michigan, in Detroit, in the nation for that matter, in J.P. McCarthy. How did that come about as a young man getting, I want to tell you, Top Gun status at WJR with J.P. McCarthy?
Yeah, it didn't really make sense. It started by listening to the radio and as a kid, you know, and I suppose like a lot of people, it started with baseball and Ernie Harwell and Bob Ufer, listening to the Michigan games, and then sort of wandering into other parts of radio. I mean, there were so many stars in Detroit. And, you know, when you're a kid, you like the funny ones, and sports probably led me to JP. And I remember very clearly on Michigan-Ohio State week, I would skip school on the Friday before the game because J.P. McCarthy did a, audio tailgate show that day. And he had Woody, and he had Bo, and he had Don Canham, and he had Bob Ufer. And as a kid, you had to pretend you had a stomach ache to stay home and listen all the way to 10 o'clock. And so I was fascinated by radio, and Dick Purtan and Jeff and Jer were on at the time, and they were funny. And if I stayed up too late, Larry King had an overnight radio show that was one of the most bizarre things you could ever want to listen to, as you may recall, if you stayed up that late. And it was eccentric, and Jay Roberts had Night Flight, and when you're a kid, you heard him, the pilot of an airplane taking off, and it was just all so exciting. And I never really knew, could you make a living in radio? I didn't know. I mean, it seemed like such a mystical thing, very, very mystical. And so what I did is I had a plan to be a football coach and a teacher, because guess who I was also, adoring at the time was Bo Schembechler.
Of course.
And I said, oh, that looks like fun. I want to do that. And I admired my high school football coach and Lloyd Carr, and I ate it all up. And so luckily, I met Lloyd Carr by accident, and I wasn't good enough to play on the team, but he said I could come and be a student manager at Michigan. And I met him because I got in trouble in school, and I was in the principal's office, and he came recruiting, and he wasn't recruiting me. He was recruiting some other players, and he said, is Sister Nancy here? Because it was Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And I said, no, she'll be back, though. And Lloyd Carr said, what are you doing here? Well, I'm serving detention. And the man sat down next to me and asked me what happened. He wanted to know all about it. And then he handed me a brochure for the summer football camp that Coach Schembechler ran. He said, I want you to come to this. So I did. And I was besotted by football. And I was going to come there, and I was going to be a student manager. And to be honest, my grades weren't good enough. A B wasn't enough to get into the U, as you well know. And so I redirected, and I said, well, what can I do in the meantime? I guess I'll go into radio. And there again, I had to skip school in order to make it happen, because there were two guys who were very funny. They were called Jeff and Jer.
Yep.
Jeff Elliott and Jerry St. James. And they were pretty funny. And I said, I'm going to ask them, if you can really do this. So I waited till the very second they signed off, and I dialed on a rotary phone to their studio, figuring maybe they'd be cleaning up or whatever, and they answered the phone. So I was lucky. And I said, can I just have 30 seconds to ask you a couple questions about radio? I'm a high school kid. And they said, yeah, we'll answer your questions, but you got to come in here, watch the show, and then we'll talk to you after. I was like, what? I was like the dog that caught the car.
No
Suddenly
kidding.
I'm going to Disney World all of a sudden. Right?
What a great opportunity. That was out of the blue.
Yeah, and if I tell you what, if they hadn't answered, or maybe they hadn't invited me in, it could be a completely different story. And so I went there, and I wore a tie, and they made me take the tie off and relax, and we had fun, and they were encouraging. And so now, to this day, every hour that I'm on the air hosting a show, the recorded voice that introduces me is Jerry St. James, because I never want to forget that if they hadn't answered that phone and they hadn't encouraged me, I would not have been on radio.
Isn't that amazing? I've got a name like that, too, in my past. Dick Fabian, who used to work in Saginaw as the news director of Channel 25. He hired me. He took a chance. I didn't have any experience in the commercial radio or TV world, and he just said, I think you're good. And he hired me as sports director on a TV station in Saginaw, literally 9 months after I played the Rose Bowl game in 1972. And I will always remember Dick Fabian as long as I live. You mentioned an interesting name, Night Flight, Jay Roberts. Mm-hmm. To me, that is what radio's all about. It takes your mind and it puts you in a different spot because you don't have pictures. You can take your mind and your imagination takes you to a seat on that plane. And I loved Jay Roberts. When I worked the news, I'd drive home at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I always had Jay Roberts on, and that plane would take off. And today we're going to Des Moines, Iowa. And it'll be 2.5 hours to Des Moines. And while you're there, let's listen to the Bickersons, and I just loved that stuff. So Michael, I get it. I know exactly where you're coming from. I was the same guy growing up. But here's the question from Jeff. How did you get to JP?
Well, I had a pit stop with Dick Purtan, who's now also in the Radio Hall of Fame in between, because again, I kind of like the funny radio. And I was at CMU working on the radio station there, and I was home at winter break. And I said, wow, I'd like to work with Dick Purtan. I wonder if he'll see me. So I did the same thing, but this time I went straight to his studio. And it was in between Christmas and New Year's, or just after New Year's before I went back to CMU, and it was a bitter, cold, 7-degree below zero day. And so I figured I needed a gimmick. So I stopped at the grocery store, which Farmer Jack at the time, if you remember that.
Sure do.
And and they had those microwave breakfasts that are frozen solid. So you get like frozen solid scrambled eggs and sausage and whatever.
Yep.
And I bought the pack, and then I went to a carryout restaurant, and I put all of that onto a plate as if it had come from a restaurant and packaged it in a bag and everything. And I wrote a note on the top that said, Mr. Purtan, I brought you breakfast. I hope it isn't too cold by now. And I went into the lobby, and I asked the lady to take it into him. And I watched through the window, and she took it into him while he was on the air. And he looked at the note, and he opened the bag, and he started laughing his tuchus off because everything was frozen. And I thought, oh my God, I made the funny man laugh. And he looked, and she pointed out the window, and he looked out at me, and he held up one finger as if to say, wait for a minute. So I waited an hour and a half till the show was over, and he came out and said a very quick hello, and then he sent Gene Taylor out, who was his writer and producer, and he said, would you like to intern with us this summer?
Wow.
So I got an internship with Dick Purtan, and that gave me some credibility. And then, you went to Saginaw to be a sports director. When I made the move after the extended internship, it turned out to be with Dick Purtan, and I went to WJR, and I produced Weekend Overnights, which was, drunk talk, basically. People calling in through the night. So I started at the bottom of the barrel over there. But to me, to go into the Golden Tower, the Fisher Building, after a Tiger game and be there all night, well, I was thrilled.
Same experience with me when I was first asked at one point to be on Joe's show in the morning. I called my mom and dad at home. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be on WJR." And to me, that was like I had made it. I had arrived.
Yeah.
Do you
And,
remember?
there's the luck of the draw then, because, one Sunday overnight I was working and they came to me and said, JP's producer is sick. Can you stick around? And me? Heck yeah. So for some reason, he took a shine to me. And I never really know why. And I ended up being his producer, and he was very kind to me and sweet to me and sassy too, and I tell you what, when you're 24 or whatever I was and you're going to work for a legend like that, I told him right away, you get loyalty. And he says, well, I need your brain too. I said, yeah, you get that, but you get loyalty. And so it was, yes, Mr. President.
Yeah.
No, he wanted to leave early. Sure, you can leave early. You want to get a guest host for Focus so you can go play golf? You betcha. And that was the way I went about it.
Well, the thing about it is, too, and I wonder, because when I was on WJR, whenever I went on, when I started doing the games with Frank, it was like this was a gigantic privilege and honor for me to work for those 3 call letters. When did you realize, when you started working for Joe, and you, of course, worked at JR, that the impact that this man and this 4 hours of programming from 6 to 10 in the morning had? When did you realize this is a big, big deal in this community?
Well, because it was obvious because of the kind of people who would come on the program. And he was, so as you know, significant, but he didn't behave like he was significant.
That was I think that was his greatest talent, that he was just another guy. And it was, whenever you had a conversation with him, it was just having a conversation with somebody as opposed to an interview, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and he had a little bit of a sassy side, but the magic of it was, in terms of the craft, like, as a broadcaster yourself, I'm sure you have techniques that you use consciously or subconsciously, but we would start the theme song, which was a 4-minute piece of music, Have a Nice Day, at 6:15 or so, and he wasn't there yet. And I got used to it eventually, but when you think about it, that he left his home on Orchard Ridge Road over by Bloomfield Hills Country Club, drove down Telegraph Road, hit the lodge, went down into Grand Boulevard, pulled into the garage of the Fisher Building, walked to the elevators, went up 21 stories, through the lobby, into the studio while the theme song was playing. He had a 4-minute window to hit that. And he'd toss his coat on the chair, sit down, put his glasses on, put his headphones on, take a sip of coffee, push the button, and say, "Good morning, world," every day. And you're just watching this like it's some kind of magic trick. Like, wow, that is ballin' cool.
What I say is that's just talent. When you've got the ability to just walk in and do what he did, like that, you said, without really thinking about it, and then do 4 hours, I'm telling you what, that's serious talent.
I'll give you another example. He'd have on the rack there in front of him the guests that I'd booked, and behind it would be every guest had a little piece of background material. It might be 2 or 3 pages, so that he could research or have a look and see. And most times that was never touched.
Yeah,
he never needed the background. He went on natural curiosity and whatever he'd learned along the way. And
that was what I think was, again, one of his great talents. That nothing sounded scripted. It just sounded like, I'm here, I'm having a good time, and why don't you join me? And it was, whether it was Lee Iacocca or the mayor of the city of Detroit or a truck driver, they were all treated the same way, and they all had an interesting story because JP made it interesting.
Yeah, he had, and he was sassy too,
Oh no, you've said that 3 times now. I'm going to get to the sassy part.
Okay.
The other question I want to know is, how big was that Rolodex?
It was when I got there, it was 2 black books of phone numbers. And remember, when we didn't have internet, we didn't have mobile phones.
Yeah.
So we had these 2 books, and they were tattered and torn. And you'd go to the H page, and it would say Woody. It'd be a phone number. And we didn't even have area codes, I think, for some of them. But it was not any kind of technology. It was old school, and those books would go in a drawer every day and locked up because they had everybody's phone number in it. And even the books were magic because when you needed to find someone, there was surely someone in that book who would be connected to that someone. Like one morning, he wanted very badly Chuck Yeager. Who broke the sound barrier, and it was his birthday or something like that. So he says, "Get me Yeager." That's all he said. So, okay. So I'm like, how in the hell am I going to get Chuck Yeager? And I started thinking, and every 8 minutes or so, he would say, "You got Yeager yet?" I'm working on it. I'm getting closer. "You got Yeager yet?" No, pretty soon. Finally, I thought I found an ad executive who knew somebody who made a commercial with him, who happened to have his phone number. And, you're calling and waking people up and waking their wives up and everything else. And so finally, I managed to get Chuck Yeager, who was in California. So he was 3 hours behind us. And he says, "I'll talk to JP if I don't have to wait on hold too long." I said, "Okay, you're going." And I typed on the screen the teleprompter for JP, and it said, "Line 2, Chuck Yeager." And he looked up at me and he said, "You mean you got Chuck Yeager?" "You son of a gun. You made it seem like I should have had him 20 minutes ago, and you're surprised I got him." So we had fun moments like that. But, he even had a football reference one time because shortly after I started working for him, and I know, like, when you were in Saginaw, you worked every hour that God sent probably.
Yep.
And so did I. And he says to me, calls me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he says, "What are you still doing there?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on the program." He says, "Go home. You're going to burn yourself out." And he says, "And by the way, whatever goes on in that studio between 6 till 10, we leave it there behind us, and then we come out and we have some fun. So, don't ever worry about it." And so it was, it could be intense at times, but he made the point to say that, don't worry about it. That's what'll happen in there. And he backed it up because every couple of weeks he'd say, "Come on, we'll have a breakfast beer." And we go down to the Pegasus, which was in the main floor of the Fisher Building, and have a Heineken or a Budweiser. And after we loosen up a little bit, I'd say, "Do you know what you said to me last week?" He'd say, "Tell me, what did I say? What did I say?" And I said, "You told me to get a song by the Four Freshmen, but that I should bring you all the library cards from the record library because whatever I picked, it'd be wrong." And he would laugh. He'd say, "Yeah, you must have thought I was a real bastard, didn't you?"
I tell you, he had a little Bo Schembechler in him, as you say, a little sassiness in him. The one thing about waking people up, I got to laugh at this, and I know that you probably had seen it. When I would get up in the morning, and I'm, like I said, working 24 hours or whatever, and I would get up, and the Tigers would have been playing on the West Coast, either the Angels or the Oakland A's. And at 6 or 7 in the morning, Sparky Anderson is on the radio, and Sparky sounded like he had a broomstick down his throat. I mean, did you guys ever because you knew it was like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. He had just gotten done with a night game that ended at midnight their time. Did you guys ever chuckle about some of those interviews with Sparky?
Well, I hated calling and waking people up, but that was the deal, and so that's what I had to do. So I was always apologizing. I said, "Sorry to wake you up," but Sparky Anderson would never hear of it. He always went out of his way to make you feel okay. Say, "No problem, no problem." And in spring training, it would be funny, like, again, this is before mobile phones. So you'd call the Holiday Inn West, I think it was called, in Lakeland.
Yeah, I stayed there. I stayed there when we covered the Tigers. We got rooms there when I was back working at Channel 4.
Yeah, okay. So you get the front desk, say, "Could I have the Green Tree restaurant, please?" And the guys stand by, and then you get someone would answer at the waitress stand, "Can you get Sparky Anderson to the phone?" And that's how it was at the time. But he never made you feel bad about it. He was exceedingly kind, and he said that Joe was the best interview of anybody who had ever interviewed him, and that was a nice compliment.
Yeah, his morning voice though was a little rough.
Yeah, Sparky.
Yeah, Joe. We just didn't get the hits when we needed them at all.
You called them Giuseppe.
Yeah,
hey, Giuseppe.
Yeah. The other thing is I want to ask you, was that, and I don't know whether I'm taking this out of context, but was that era with Jay and JP and Dick Purtan and all that, would you consider that kind of the golden age, a little bit of radio, and when radio was just dominant with the newspapers and the television station? I mean, it was a great media circus to be in that period of time, in that era. Do you believe that, Mike?
I thank God I was around in that era. Now I missed the era, and you did too, when there would be an orchestra in that studio.
Live music.
That must have been pretty cool.
Well, didn't Mark Avery later on in the day have afternoon music hall? Didn't he have a live orchestra in there, or a live combo?
Yeah, he from time to time, but we were on it. This was the back edge of it, really.
Yeah.
And, so I missed that, and I'm sure if you look back at think about that was really magical and cool too. But yeah, these you didn't have a mobile phone to check your news before you got out of bed, so you had to go to the radio. Maybe your paper was on the porch, but the radio brought it to life because he had 5 newspapers in front of him. The News and the Free Press and the USA Today, and I think we had the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And so we would call the people who were in those stories, and it brought it to life. And when you think about like Bill Bonds and J.P. McCarthy racing the 2 boblo boats down the Detroit River to raise money for charity, do you need anything more colorful than that to talk about in a town? In a town that's across the river from Canada, it was magic. You're right about that.
And that's what I mean about it being a golden era. That kind of thing, again, never happened today. Don't have 2 personalities big enough, I think, to pull it off, to be quite frank.
And to your point, if you were going to have a show where you said, "Hey, I'm going to fly an airplane and I'm going to tell everybody to look out the window to the right, and we're going over Denver, and we just passed Mount Rushmore," they'd say, "What do you mean? Shouldn't you be on the air screaming about right-wing politics?" I want to be creative. I don't want to just blast away at people and pour poison in their ear all day.
I always thought Mike Worf was one of the most talented people on radio that I have ever known. He created what I would call radio dramas in an hour when he did stories and documentaries, and I thought Jay Roberts did the same thing with Night Flight. He suspended reality and took you to another spot, and you were delighted to go with him. Yeah,
wasn't that something? That was real super creativity. I hope we haven't lost it entirely, but
I don't think we have entirely. But it's it's not featured as much as it probably should be.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's true. But I mean, we try to put some pluck into what we do and try to make sure that you get a little music and you get some sound and you get some production along with the radio. Because as you know, when you used to go to WJR or any big station, you went in a newsroom and there were lots of people working. And now you walk into a radio station and there's nobody there. They're cubes, and they're doing it on a skeleton crew compared to what we used to do.
Absolutely, yeah. You had newsrooms. I mean, back in the day, WJR's newsroom was as vital and as busy as a television newsroom, and producing 15-minute newscasts every hour. I mean, that took time, it took talent, it took money, and it took a commitment to that, to the news. And WJR and everybody around town did that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
not
necessarily the case. Was that you
coined the phrase when you're calling a football game and you say Wolverines are moving left to right across your radio dial? Was that you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of guys have done that before me. That's something I've borrowed a little bit. My idea is when I do that, it goes back to my thought of WJR. You've got to create a picture in the listener's mind of what's going on, whether you are like Jay Roberts and put them in a seat in an airplane and you take off from Metro to go to wherever. In my opinion is if you've been to Michigan Stadium and a player runs down right in front of the Michigan bench, you can see that right in front of the Michigan bench. Or he's going into the south end zone where the flagpole is. You know that. So you have a picture of that in your mind, and that's what radio gives you the opportunity to do. So I try to do those descriptive things, moving right to left, and if they know where I'm sitting, they can kind of visualize that offense is going, from right to left, heading to the north end zone at Michigan Stadium. So it helps, I think, draw the picture for them, put the game in their mind, take them from the radio to a seat in the stadium. That's what my job is all about.
Like a penguin with a hot herring in its cummerbund.
And his dauber is way up as he scores for the Wolverines. God bless his cotton picking maize and blue heart. Hey, one last thing. One last thing about Joe. You wrote a book, and let's get to the sassy side, I guess, now. And the title of the book about Joe was "Just Don't Tell Him Where I'm At or Where I Am." That was true about JP. There were times when he was places before he did that radio show. You said, "How did he do it?"
Well, I'm looking at the book right now, in fact, and that was written, unfortunately, posthumously when I got together a lot of his friends. And the really cool thing about that is that went to #1. And I'm going to walk over there right now because it's in a little frame. And I used to get up in the morning on Sundays when the Detroit Free Press would run the rankings. And because we didn't have internet, I'd go down to the Barnes & Noble or whoever's selling the newspaper, and I'd go in there and see how's it doing. And it went from #5 to #3, and eventually it went to #1. And I thought, God, we got to make JP #1 again. And it was so satisfying. And when I look at the list right now, JP McCarthy, Just Don't Tell Him Where I Am, was #1. This is 1997. #2 was Tuesdays with Maury, Mitch Albom. #3 was Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Wow.
Angela's Ashes was #4. And The Dark Side of Camelot by Seymour Hersh, a known journalist, was #5. And so JP McCarthy topped those fine pieces of literature for one more time, and it was very satisfying. And that's what he used to say when he'd have a guest on phone. He'd say, well, mention my name in Albuquerque. Just don't tell him where I am.
Yep, that was Joe.
We know where he is now.
Yeah, we do. And the other thing you've done, Michael, I would talk about great personalities. You've been friends and made friends with a lot of different people. And one of them was former president, George H.W. Bush. How did that all come about? Because you've been at his golf tournament before. I know that you have known his family and his wife and been in Kennebunkport before. Talk to me how that relationship developed for you.
Well, it's funny. It traces back to J.P. McCarthy. When I was young and I heard that Vice President Bush was coming to Wyandotte for the biggest 4th of July parade every year in Michigan. So I thought I'd go down there and get a look at it. And I saw the Vice President, Mrs. Bush, coming up. And I said, wow, that looks pretty cool. And I'd like to be involved in that. So I volunteered as a campaign volunteer. And believe it or not, at that young age, I thought I'd be painting signs or something, and they let me drive a van in the motorcade when the president would come into campaign from Metro Airport to Southfield or downtown Detroit or whatever. And so there'd be the limousine and the spare limousine, and then there's a gunship and a media car, and then a bunch of vans with staff people in it. So I would drive these vans, and there would be Lee Atwater or James Baker III, and they figure there's a 20-year-old kid driving the van. They talked strategy or they talked whatever they talked about. And I'm all ears, man. Listen up there. And so eventually, when I was working for J.P. McCarthy, you might remember there was a man called Heinz Prechter who had invented the sunroof. Yeah. And I knew the people that were on Joe's show were obviously very important. And I don't know what gave me, once again, the temerity to do this, but I said, I'm going to ask them for advice. And so I picked out 10 people, and I wrote them letters, and I said, would you mind if I had asked you for advice? And all of them, of course, because of Joe's juice, said, come on to the office or come on in and ask. And so I went into like Tony Franco and Keith Crane, and Heinz Prechter was a Hoot McInerney was another one. And I would just say, I'm 26 years old. I'm in this really cool position. What should I be thinking? That's all I asked him. The answers were quite varied, but Heinz Prechter actually took me to lunch. And I know, as I look back now, I'm like, he must have been bored out of his mind with a 26-year-old kid across from him.
This is like Peter Pan stuff. This is so good. I love this. Michael, I wish I could have been a fly on your shoulder to just go through these experiences with you at such a young age.
I don't know what possessed me to do it, but
God was smiling on you, man.
Yeah, and so anyway, a couple months later, Heinz Prechter called me, or his secretary called and said he'd like you to come to lunch. I go to his hotel that he owned downriver, and it was President Bush was there, and he remembered that I was a fan, and so I got to meet the president. And then years later, I saw that they had a charity golf tournament in Kennebunkport, and so I just once again picked up the phone. I said, "How would you mind a live broadcast from the event?" And the organizers said, "Sure, we'd love it." So I went there and I did the tournament, did the broadcast, but basically what I did is I didn't ask for anything. I just gave, and I would bring celebrities if I could get them, or I could bring donors, and sooner or later they, for whatever reason, took a shine to me, and it was really flattering, but you got to put the time in, and you got to be willing to give and not ask for anything. And so then, the golf professional there, Ken Rayner, he kept telling stories just like I'm telling to you, or you tell to me. And I said, "Well, would you ever consider a book?" And that took me about 5 years, because he was kind of hesitant to write about his friendship with the president. He was his golf pro, and he'd been to Camp David, all that sort of thing. And eventually, Jim Nantz actually helped me convince him, because Jim was friends with the president, and then when Ken asked the president if he minded if we did it. He didn't mind at all. So we wrote this very nice book that's no politics. It's called I Call Him Mr. President, Stories of Golf, Fishing, and Life, with my friend George Herbert Walker Bush. And it's all about what it's like to travel and be with the president and play golf with him. And it also has a bunch of celebrity excerpts that I got from people who are just like me, who were, slack-jawed and goo-goo-eyed at going to Kennebunkport there to his house or his golf course. And to think that when that book launched a couple of years ago, we had a book launch party at a small theater in Kennebunkport, and the president and Mrs. Bush were in the fourth row while Ken and I are on stage, because they would never sit in the front row. They're not those kind of people. And to think I come a long way from the Wyandotte 4th of July parade to be presenting something on stage in front of President Bush.
Pretty amazing.
That was quite a moment.
Yeah, pretty amazing indeed.
Else.
That was the other thing.
But the lessons are all there.
Yeah, they are.
To keep giving. Invite yourself to the party.
That's you know how to segue, don't you? You've done this before, because I was going to go to your career as a writer. And golf is in there very big. You mentioned Jim Nantz, great CBS announcer. By the way, thank you very much. I don't know whether Jim Nantz knew me from Adam, but he was very kind on your show. I don't know whether you wrote the script for him when I was let go by WJR on the Lions broadcast. Jim Nantz, you sent me an excerpt of that, and I'm going, holy cow, I didn't know Jim Nantz knew who I was. That was that was special.
He lit right up at the sound of your name, didn't he? And why wouldn't he? You were there for decades.
I was, but we'd not ever really run into each other a lot. I had said hello in passing, and we were both working. You know how that is when you're working a game and you're running here and you're trying to get information there. But that was very impressive. How did you get to know Jim?
I got to know Jim, believe it or not, right back to J.P. McCarthy, because we had Ben Wright as our golf analyst.
Yep.
Sponsored by Jacobson's at the time. And so from the major championships, I would have to wake up Ben, which, if you know the kind of partier Ben was with the CBS crew, that was really a rough wake-up call. And especially at Augusta National, or God forbid it be at Pebble Beach. But while Ben was on hold, he would be telling me these stories. And so eventually I did the same thing. And I said, would you ever consider writing a book? And it took a little convincing. I went down to visit him, and he said, people have always said that. No one's ever done anything about it. I said, well, I'd like to do something about it. And so we wrote Good Bounces and Bad Lies, which was essentially me interviewing. I interviewed him for 50 hours and turned it into a book, and interviewed friends of his like Pat Summerall and Jim Nantz, and so that's how I met Nantz at Augusta National. And once again, for whatever reason, he took a shine to me, and and then I'd say it's about giving. Again, I've never asked Jim Nantz for anything, and I have tried to find ways to give to him, and one of those ways was when I arranged for him to be the MC of the Thanksgiving Day Parade when he's coming in for the Lions game, and he got to take his kids and family with Tony Michaels and do that. And Jim, as big as a star as he is, when I suggested it, he said, "You don't think they'd let me do that, do you?"
Hey, I know,
I think they will.
And Michael, I know for a fact that he really enjoyed that, and I think that if they have a picture of him, running down Woodward Avenue in that float, the smile on Jim Nantz's face is from ear to ear. I think he truly did enjoy that.
Yeah, he sure did. So it was through Ben Wright, and that book is really a fun one too, and because it's an inside look at network golf and the golf world, and in fact, I see Ben about 4 times a year still.
Do you? And I also know that Ben Wright had, other than Henry Longhurst, the best golf voice in all of golf, because he's got that British thing, and it's an understated kind of way he approaches good shots and bad shots. And Ben ran into some trouble a little bit. Did you guys go into that in the book about Ben Wright?
In the 50-plus hours of interviews we did, and by the way, if you want an inside look at that, when I basically lived with him when we did this, and the first day we recorded all afternoon, and I was transcribing in the bedroom that he let me stay in, and he came to the door about 5 o'clock, and he said, "Do you want something to drink?" And I said, "Oh, thanks. No, I'm okay." He says, No. "Do you want something to drink?" Oh, that kind of, and I looked at happy hour, of course. So we would then enjoy typically red wine by that stage in his life, because he'd been to Betty Ford and given up vodka. But once we'd had a bottle of wine or so, the stories got better. And I said, "Forget taping in the afternoon. We'll just tape in the evening." And it was way better when the tongue was loosened up a little bit. But I didn't ask him about the CBS political incorrectness firing until the very end of going through his rich life of being with Ben Hogan and Jack Nicklaus and Princess Monaco, Princess Grace. And he was grateful in the end, because he said, by the time you asked me about that sore subject, I got perspective in that that's just a small, tiny thing of a very lucky life that I've had. And that made me feel real good, that, really nice that he got that kind of perspective.
I'm glad too, because when it happened, he was a bit bitter, as I recall.
Yes. And that is before he went to Betty Ford. And I think he felt betrayed by the journalism community. And, and to speak to that point, they called him at night. He gave them a candid answer, and they ran with it. And I think, in these days, it wouldn't have been so bad, but it was the bad way to conclude a career. Now, he did some work after that, enough, including this book, to redeem himself and to feel better about it all. But, that Churchillian voice of his, I was best man at his most recent wedding, which was now 15, 16 years ago. And I remember I'm driving him to the church. We're in our tuxedos. And I said, "Are you nervous?" And he said, "Nervous? I've done this 4 times before. It's not the weddings that make me nervous. It's the divorces."
So I tell you, that's pretty good Ben Wright you did right there, Michael. Very well done. Very well done.
Thank you.
I think I think his career, his body of work speaks for itself. The one little hiccup is what many people remember him for. But I'll tell you, if you go back and listen to some of those broadcasts that he did, he's a delight to listen to, and he puts the game in an English perspective that I think added a little bit of a spice, a little sassiness, if you will, to what in some ways American golf broadcasts are so quiet and so, stilted. This was a little bit of a curveball that I think golf broadcast needed. I think he paved the way personally. I think you paved the way for the guys like Gary McCord and David Faraday.
Yeah, and Gary McCord was his foil, as you recall.
I sure do.
So Gary was the empty-headed Californian, and Ben was the stiff British, tough, and they went at each other, and so they remembered that what you said earlier. It's entertainment, it's sports, but it also has to be entertainment. And to just sit there and say, "Nice shot, this one breaks to the left," it's not good enough. And Ben was a journalist, so he knew how to paint the pictures, and he knew when to also stay quiet too.
Yeah, he did. Well, I used to love when Ben Wright, someone would hit a poor shot, and Ben Wright would just go, "Oh dear."
And you could see it for yourself.
Exactly. You didn't need to. You didn't need him to have described it. It had hit on the green and bounced over back into the heavy rough, and he'd go, "Oh dear." He won't like that. He won't like that one.
Aquatic Doom was another one.
Exactly. Hey, the other thing about you, Michael, that people may not know, and I find what you've done with your life and everything, and I'll get to when we finish, I'm going to get to the show, Michigan's Big Show, that you host every morning around the state of Michigan. But when did the travel bug bite you? That you've run with the Bulls in Pamplona, haven't you?
I sure did. That was wow. That's
were
the one
you
people
thinking?
Really love to talk about.
I was going to say no, but that's like there's so many more things that you've done, but that one's like you want to say to somebody when they do that, "What are you thinking?"
That is the pinnacle, and I for every year I would see it on television, talk about it on the radio, and it was like such madcap fun. And I finally I was getting close to 50, and I said, "Why don't you just go do it?" And I did, and I remember, I went the day before with a company called Made for Spain and Portugal, and they gave me a coach. And the coach, who we met in the cobblestone streets the day before, and he says, "Okay, I want you to stand here, and at 8:00 in the morning, you're going to hear a cannon go off." And he says, "That means they've opened the gates. And then, a little bit later, you're going to hear another rocket go off. That means all of the bulls are out. And there's 6 of them. And when you go there in the newspaper, they publish the day before which 6 bulls from what ranch are going to be coming out, like the program." And I got the Sabata bulls, which I've known for the most gorings and killings of any. And I said, "Well, if we're going to do this, we might as well do it." And I could see their pictures in the paper, 2,000-pound bull coming up. So the coach told me, "Stand here. Don't move until X and run this way." And, and he says, "You have to look me in the eye and tell me if I'm going to teach you this. You have to agree, and you know that you might lose your life doing it."
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Didn't that give you second thoughts?
Well, no, because I'd come all that way, and I said, "All right, I understand that." He said, "Do you ever run?" He said, "Well, I used to, but not anymore." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, once I had children, I decided that it wasn't, responsible."
Uh-huh.
My son's standing right next to me listening to this, Harrison.
Yeah.
And so we go through the day, and we're sitting there at night at dinner, and he looks at me and he says, "Dad, I don't think you should do it."
Smart lad.
I said, "Well, but we've come all this way." And I said, we're talking about there'd be like 900 runners, and it's me, and the odds are. He says, "Dad, you think the odds are with you?" He says, "Let's take a look at this. You're not fast. You're 50 years old. You've never done it before. I'd say if there's a risk pool, you're in it." And I said, "That's a University of Michigan education, right?"
Absolutely. There's a smart, as I said, there's a smart lad right there.
Yeah. So you get there at 7 in the morning, and they seal off the streets, and you wait for an hour. And that's the first time in my life that I ever had to set a wake-up alarm in order to get up and drink. Because I needed to be a little bit, like most of the people in Pamplona stay up all night, party, and then do it.
They call it liquid courage, huh?
Yeah, so I had to do that in the morning, but I was glad when the Bulls went by. I'll tell you that. But
I bet you
boy,
were.
what an adrenaline rush! I mean, you played the Rose Bowl, you played for Bo, you know what it's like when you have an adrenaline rush, and that was one.
I imagine it was. You've traveled all over the world. Real quickly, in a minute or two. Favorite spots that you've traveled to and written about?
Monaco is pretty cool. I got to meet Prince Albert there and gamble in that casino that 007 gambled in all the movies. I think that's a pretty cool spot. Ireland, I've been more than 30 times because it's a place you can really let your hair down and just go where Ireland takes you.
But about Ireland, isn't it? To me, it's the people that make that such a magical place.
Oh, that's why you shouldn't have an itinerary, because you might find yourself in a pub with a peat fire going and you get in some conversation and you just got to go with it. And so I definitely love Ireland. Italy's been on my radar lately, and Venice, I've thought about every day since I've been there. So those are the ones that come to mind, but I'm always wondering where I'm going to go next. And then I always love to hear travel stories from people. So what about you? And you can't say Pasadena.
No, I will tell you this, that Robbie and I we've done Europe and we've done Rhine River cruises. We've done the Caribbean. We've done the cruises. We've done a lot of travel. And of late, what we've decided to do and get in the car. A couple springs ago, we got in a car. We drove to the UP. We turned left, and we didn't stop till we got to Yellowstone Park.
Wow.
And we just took our time. Through Duluth, Minnesota, at the Great Lakes Freshwater Aquarium, Bemidji, Minnesota, Medora, North Dakota, at the entrance to Teddy Roosevelt State Park, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Cody, Wyoming, little towns, little places. Stopped at, didn't stop at the Ritz or any of the Hyatts. Stopped at the Rough Rider Inn in Medora. And that to me was, we have done a little bit more of that driving big. We just took one up to the UP and went to Munising and Picture Rock and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point.
You got there. Huh?
Yes, I did. I had to. I mean, it was one of those things that in the state of Michigan we have so much, and so Robbie and I, those are the kind of travel things we've been doing of late, and we found that it's really much more personal because you're driving, and if you see something along the side of the road, I mean, I remember we stopped somewhere in, I forget, it was Iowa. They had a sour cream raisin pie at Mom's Pie Shop. I said, I got to stop and have a piece of that. And it was great. Michael had my picture taken in somewhere in North Dakota underneath a 50-foot concrete dairy cow named Salem Sue. So that's kind of what we've done from our travel. But your travel is fabulous. It's great to read where you've been. Now, here's the other question, one of your interests that I did not know about. The cigar.
Travel?
No, the cigars. You're a cigar guy. You've written for Cigar Aficionado, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And
when did that start?
Oh, when the craze came on, I guess I became interested. But probably the pinnacle of it was I got to go to Havana, and everybody knows about the Cuban cigars being so fantastic and all that sort of thing. And being in Havana was a treat too, because you really weren't supposed to be there at the time as an American, but we got some kind of special, some sort of special exemption of some sort, one or another. But I remember walking through the streets and imagining Godfather 2, Fredo, it's the only way out, Fredo, come with me. So it's magic, and you learn so much. And I do remember also there was a tour guide there who had taken me around for 5 days in the small group I was with. And I said, you'd probably like to go to America, wouldn't you? And he said, I can visit America. And I said, you can? And he says, yeah, I can take a week off and go to America. And he says, but when I come back, I won't have this job. Ooh. He said, I'll have a different job. He says, it won't be anything like this job because it's taken me many years to work up to getting this kind of job. So it was a reality check, with the government there and whatnot.
An eye opener.
Yeah.
No question about that.
If you keep your ears open, you learn a lot, don't you?
Absolutely.
For a talk show host and a football announcer.
Hey, listening is the most important thing a talk show host can do. Learning how to listen.
Yeah. Sometimes I literally, when I'm hosting that morning show, I put my hand physically over my mouth because the silence happened recently with Joel Ferguson. He was answering a question, and I put my hand over my mouth. He can't see me because he's on the phone. And I knew, stay silent because he'll probably tell you more. And that awkward silence that comes gets filled by somebody. It's like a duel. Who's going to do it? And if you wait long enough, they usually jump in and tell you the thing you really want to know.
Do you know who does that a lot? Police investigators.
Oh, really?
When they are interviewing suspects, they will talk to someone and then they just won't talk. And the suspect wants to say something more, and usually that's when they find themselves getting into trouble, and they make the misstatement where then the investigator can say, wait a minute ago you said, and that's when they start to trip up, if you will. It's a great technique. I've police investigators use that quite a bit. They just don't talk, and whoever they're talking to will continue on. That's a great technique. Good job, Michael.
Well, I love to go. I still go listen to the likes of Larry King and Dick Purtan because you can find all that stuff. Like you can find Jay Roberts on Night Flight too, and I remind myself, okay, short questions are the best because I hear talk show hosts, and these are people who answer the question before they're done asking the question, and there's no time left. So you get like a Larry King who'll say something when he'll have a football coach on. They'll say, "Football, why?"
Yeah.
And that's it.
No, I agree with you.
Great.
When I listen to my podcast back, I try to learn and think about, hey, make them quick. They're the ones that you're talking to, not you. And that's kind of how I do it.
Listen to your own stuff.
Well, it's an old thing from Bo. It's like you got to get better. You don't stay the same. You either get worse or you get better. And if you don't try to improve everything that you do at every point, then you're going to get wallowed up. And I try to listen to things and see, how can I make that better? And it's just, it's one of those things that, when you're 17 and he beats it into you for 4 years, it stays with you through all those years.
Because supposedly Ernie Harwell never liked to listen to his own broadcast. He was afraid that he would lose his confidence.
I always felt that you could get, I don't necessarily like to, but I think you can get more information from it. There was a period of time, for instance, when I was doing broadcasting, I was working with Frank and we were doing play-by-play. He was doing play-by-play. I was doing color. And Frank would say something and I would say exactly. I must have said exactly 55 times during a broadcast. It was awful. And I just said, man, what are you doing? And literally the next week, I found myself saying "igs," and I would change. I would stop and try to work some of the. I consciously in my mind would pause when I was going to say something, that second and a half, and formulate something other than exactly to say. And it became. Yeah, exactly. See, I did it just now. Isn't that stupid? Isn't that the dumbest thing, Michael? But
well, that is, I guess, like football, right? If you were on the line and you had a little tell that this was going to be a pass play or a run play, you'd have to spot that and say, "Hey, don't put your hand like that," because then they know it's a drop back.
No, you have that. And that's where I think you learn from your mistakes a little bit. And since I've been broadcasting, now I've gotten that one taken care of. But there's always little things that you can fix. So that's what I try to do. Anyway, I want to thank you for being with us. But first thing I want to do is say, you're still working hard and doing your radio thing. Michigan's Big Show. How has that been for you to be the broadcaster? You've had JP in your background. You've had all of this. You've had travel. You've had authors. You've had great personalities in your life. And here you are in Michigan with a syndicated morning drive talk show out of the state capital. How has that worked for you?
Well, I never expected to be a host, but when I think about it, I have now worked for as a producer for 5 guys in the National Radio Hall of Fame. And so I spent some time training, and what a treat that was. That would have been a heck of a career just to do that. And so I kind of feel like where we started with this chat today is that a steward I am of the radio legacy of Michigan and Detroit. And so those voices are frequently heard on my program. Every single hour I have the clip of JP saying "Good morning, world" before I start. I have a little bit of Paul Carey saying, Michael Patrick Shiels is on the air. it all takes me back, and it reminds me every hour, you would have swam across Lake Michigan to get a radio job. So I don't ever want to hear you complaining that you got to get up at 4 a.m, or it's hard work or whatever it might be, because you wanted this so badly, and you got it, and you honor those guys that taught you all that. And so that's kind of how I honestly feel about it. I'm ripping everybody's act off as best I can, and it seems to be holding together.
Michael, we are very lucky people to be in this business and to have survived and still work in it. And many times you make your own luck, and you have made your own luck throughout these years. And I can't thank you enough, and I wish you continued success.
That is very sweet of you. This is quite an hour for me to know. I'm usually the question asker, so it was very, very fun, and I look forward to seeing you. And go Blue, and please give my best to Robbie, and mention my name and Omer. Just don't tell him where I am.
Amen, brother. Michael can be heard mornings across the state of Michigan on the syndicated radio show, Michigan's Big Show, with Michael Patrick Shiels. It was great talking with him, and if you want to know a guy who is up for pretty much anything, Michael is that guy. He's also unafraid to ask. His book, Invite Yourself to the Party, is an example of how he gets it done. His books are available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Keep an eye on my Facebook page, Jim Brandstatter76, and my Twitter account, @JimBrandstatter, for more information on upcoming episodes of Conversations With. You can also find them on all of your favorite podcast platforms. You can also go to thebrandyshow.com or jimbrandstatter.com and navigate your way to Season 1 and Season 2 episodes of Conversations With.